Okay, I'm not sure exactly how much you could hear, but I couldn't hear myself. Think there was a rather wild Mario Kart game or Super Mario Brothers, something like that going on. In any case, we're up to part six of Wesch chapter five. Still trying to get through the hunter gatherers. So number one, Paleolithic people had not yet been forced from the richest environments, that is, the river valleys, by armies of diseased and starving farmers. Number two, Paleolithic people were also not living in any proximity to states. We've already mentioned this already, but it bears repeating that hunter-gatherers today, foraging people living in band societies today, are not the same. So we have to be very careful. Nevertheless, we can learn a lot from studying reports of contemporary band societies in the deserts, rainforests, and Arctic regions where they live, and comparing that evidence in a very limited way to evidence of all human groups prior to 12,000 years ago. Now, the luxury trap, this is the question of why. Why would we give up ease of life, good health, for a lot of work and a lot of disease? Part of that is the demographics of agriculture. You just get more food surpluses with agriculture, and with more food surpluses, you crank up the population, and thus 200 starving, diseased, abused, enslaved farmers will come in and they'll just start beating up the 15 fit, healthy, rested foragers, and we'll defeat them because there's only 15 of them and there's 200 of us. So it's just a numbers game. Number two, an explanation for why individuals chose to do it. We have incremental change. Each generation makes it just a little bit easier to gather food, making the population just a little bit larger, deferring the split in the village just a little bit longer, and increasing their dependency on harvested food and not gathered food. Before they know it, they're working 80 hours a week to pay for their mansion, yacht, and luxury car. Okay? It's just the same way with us. We go into debt, and next thing you know, we're spending all of our time away from the house working so that we can pay for the house that we can't even enjoy because we're away from it all the time. It's a trap. Uh, Neolithic Revolution, 12,000 years ago, we domesticated plants and animals. Basically, we were going out to out to gather seeds. These seeds were growing naturally in this place. Over and over again, we would go back and we'd walk on this path. And as we walked on the path, we carried the seeds back. And as we carried the seeds back, some of them fell by the path. And so the next year we noticed, hey, they're growing here. Hey, we don't have to walk 3 miles to the patch of seeds growing. We can plant them closer and then we'll harvest them. And so they started doing that. And then they realized, oh, if we plant these bigger ones next to those bigger ones, the result will be bigger. And so now we've got domestication of wheat. Okay? It's a very, very long process, but it ends in the Neolithic Revolution, where we have the very first dogs domesticated from wolves, the very first cattle domesticated from wild cattle, the very first goats domesticated from mountain goats, etc. Um, Industrial Revolution happens next, 250 years ago, somewhere around 1800. 90% of all humans, up until that time, 90% of all humans were working in agriculture. Over 50% of the population still are working in agriculture in a few countries, but in the US, 98% of the workers do not work in agriculture. So it's 2% of the population. Those of you from Preble County, you know this. 2% of the population feeding 98% of the population. The rest of us are doing something else apart from producing food. So, what did this bring about, this Industrial Revolution? It brought about the collapse of the family and the community. 250 years ago, less than 10% of goods and services were marketed, that is, bought and sold. 90% of goods and services were raised from the ground and then traded in gifts, right? The same thing that we saw with the Orokaiva took place with everyone all over the world. Um, Today, most things are bought and sold, and only a few things are gifted. So that results in the collapse of the family and community. We no longer rely on our friends to give us food, and then we give them food. Instead, we rely on ourselves to earn money and buy food. So that destroys the family, right? Because you're no longer relying on your family, you're relying on yourself. Um, Environmental costs, humans and their domesticated pets and livestock, which are other kinds of pets, cows, horses, etc., make up 90% of the large animals globally. So only 10% are actually wild animals when you look at the large animals. Um, um, uh, 10% are, all the elephants of the world, all the lions, all the zebras, etc. And 90% are these cows and sheep that if we disappeared off the planet, they would be gone within a decade or two. Cows can't survive on their own. They would evolve into wild animals, or they would just die. There are 10 times as many chickens as all the wild birds put together. So these animals and plants would disappear within a few years if humans stopped caring for them. They are totally our um, food that we raise to keep for our own pleasure. Anthropocene is a term for this new geological period, Earth dominated by human beings. Um, Agriculture has been said to be the greatest mistake in human history. It destroyed our bodies. The food we eat is not appropriate for what we evolved to eat. It destroyed our land. You can see terrible deserts um, the irrigation projects just destroying entire ecosystems, diverting rivers away from lakes and into keeping tomatoes growing and that sort of thing. And it's just and it produced huge surpluses, but that produces huge populations, and so now we have almost 8 billion people all trying to get food on the planet. So it's really really difficult. We call this a post-human future with robots replacing humans, um, mechanical muscles. We have self-driving cars that are going to replace truckers, maybe. Already, plane. You say, oh well, what will happen when the truckers get redundant, get replaced by the robot? And it could go to either two ways. It could go the way of where they totally replace them, and that's the hope. That's why they're spending all that money building the self driving cars, is because they hope that they can just get rid of the drivers completely. Um, but it could turn into the situation where we have pilots, right? So you have pilots who pilot planes, and they are relatively well paid professionals piloting these planes all over. But actually, their planes are flown by robots too. The pilot gets behind the wheel and flies the plane for about 5 minutes during takeoff, and then they switches on the autopilot, and the autopilot takes over for the rest of the flight and takes over the landing, and then the pilot gets behind the wheel again after the plane has already landed, and turns it toward the building and taxis up. So basically, pilots have already been replaced by self-driving airplanes. But the only reason that the pilot has to be in the cockpit is due to safety. So there are laws in place saying that they have to be there, and that's why they have a job. So it could be the same for truckers too. Truckers could, the Teamsters will probably push through laws saying that even if the trucks are driven by robots, we still need a qualified driver in the cab, making sure the robot doesn't go crazy and kill everyone. And that's something to think about. Mechanical minds, we can have algorithms that replace human reason and decision making. The singularity, when a robot can create its own replacement. This is a not too distant idea, with all so much artificial intelligence going on, and so many of our decisions now are being made by algorithms. What we see on social media and such. Nanobots in our bloodstream, replacing our bodies cell by cell. Could it happen? Perhaps. And then we have virtual reality, where we could be living in completely alternate realities someday. The result of all this is transhumanism, the use of technology to enhance human capabilities and overcome disability, disease, and death. How did we get here? From global industrial society. So this is again where Wesch didn't really fill in all the details, and so I'm going to take us off on a little um, a journey here through the global economy. Where did the global economy come from? And this is also very important for our class. So hang on, folks. We're going to get there.